What if there exists a question so profound, so fundamentally impossible, that it doesn't merely challenge your mind, it unravels the very fabric of reality? Imagine a thought hovering on the edge of comprehension, a thread that, if pulled, could collapse the cosmos into an endless loop of paradoxes. Every answer you think you have only leads to another layer of contradiction, another mirror reflecting an impossible truth. This is not a riddle nor a puzzle with a solution waiting in some corner of logic. It is a question that lives between moments, threading through time, space, and consciousness itself. Tonight, you are invited to follow this question, step by step, as it bends perception, distorts certainty, and forces the mind to confront the impossible. Each section will take you deeper into layers of reality you never knew were fragile, and by the end, you may see the universe not as it is, but as a question waiting to be asked. There is a question that hums beneath the surface of existence, hidden in the spaces between thoughts, in the quiet pause of a heartbeat, and in the infinitesimal instant before awareness wakes. It is not a question you can ask aloud, because the very act of speaking it demands answers that do not exist. It is a question that dissolves every framework you use to understand reality. Philosophers have chased it through corridors of logic. Scientists have attempted to model it within equations, and yet no one, not a single mind in the history of thought, has ever approached it without fracturing the edges of comprehension. To confront this question is to realize that some inquiries are not meant to be answered, but to be lived, like a shadow stretching across the mind. The more you attempt to capture it, the further it slips, always at the edge of thought, always beyond the reach of certainty. It is a predator of clarity, a storm that erodes the foundations of understanding, while remaining invisible, intangible, yet undeniably present. The moment you recognize its existence, reality itself begins to feel brittle. Time, which once flowed like a river, now seems like a fractured mirror, reflecting countless possibilities. Each reflection offers a different answer, yet none satisfy the demand for resolution. The universe does not break in loud explosions or violent catastrophes. It fractures quietly, in the subtle spaces between what you know and what you cannot know. This question, by its very nature, exposes the limits of the mind. It whispers of the void where certainty once dwelled, and it asks you to stare into that void without blinking. At first, one tries to define it. Perhaps it is a question about the origin of all things, the meaning behind every flicker of matter, or the purpose of consciousness itself. But soon, even the broadest definitions crumble. Every answer opens another question. Every explanation folds into contradiction. This is a question that grows as you approach it, a recursive echo that multiplies infinitely. Logic attempts to cage it, language attempts to name it, yet all attempts fail because it exists outside the confines of both. The danger of this question is not that it destroys knowledge. It reveals that knowledge is a fragile illusion. Your memories, your perceptions, the very structure of thought itself, seem insufficient in the face of it. You realize that certainty is temporary, a fragile scaffolding built upon assumptions that collapse under the weight of this impossibility. Even the most brilliant minds, upon confronting it, report the same phenomenon, a sudden vertigo of thought, a dizziness as if standing at the edge of infinity, where stepping forward is not an act of courage, but a surrender to the unknowable. To live with this question is to embrace paradox. You cannot answer it, yet it answers you in ways that are subtle, almost imperceptible. It forces you to observe patterns in chaos, to see connections where none seem to exist, and to recognize that reality is not a fixed structure, but a tapestry woven by inquiry itself. Each attempt to resolve it, each mental maneuver to define it, reveals more of the void behind the universe, exposing the hidden architecture of impossibility that underpins everything you thought you understood. Some attempt to escape it, turning to distractions, noise, or the comfort of repetition. Yet the question persists. It is patient. It does not demand to be solved. It demands only to be recognized. It waits in the quiet moments, in the spaces where thought is most vulnerable, whispering of the unanswerable, the irreducible, the infinite. It is a companion and a tormentor, a reflection of the universe's complexity condensed into a single, relentless inquiry. Ultimately, this question is not a riddle to be solved, but a lens through which all other questions are refracted. To encounter it is to confront the fragility of certainty, the fleeting nature of understanding, and the astonishing vastness of the unknown. It cannot be answered, yet in its impossibility, it illuminates every other question you have ever asked, revealing their limitations and their brilliance in equal measure. As the mind attempts to circle it, to pin it down with reason, a subtle transformation occurs. You realize that the pursuit itself is the point. The question's impossibility does not diminish thought. It enhances it, stretching cognition to its limits, and inviting consciousness to expand in ways previously unimaginable. To dwell on it is to experience a strange clarity, not the clarity of knowing, but the clarity of seeing how unknowing shapes reality, how the impossible threads through every decision, every perception, every flicker of awareness. And so, the question remains. It cannot be answered. It cannot be escaped. It is not waiting for solutions, only for recognition. And the moment you recognize it, you step into a universe that is no longer the same, a universe that feels vast, fragile, infinite, and impossibly alive. You begin the journey of the mind that cannot rest, the consciousness that must follow, the explorer who understands that some questions are not doors to answers, but portals into existence itself. Logic is often presented as the solid ground beneath thought, the scaffolding that holds reality in place, the invisible law that orders chaos into understanding. We trust it, lean on it, build entire worlds of knowledge upon it. Yet there exists a point, a thin, fragile edge, where logic itself falters, where the very rules meant to guide comprehension begin to twist and contradict, revealing that even reason is not absolute. To approach this edge is to confront a terrifying realization. The universe does not owe coherence to anyone, and the systems we trust to contain it are themselves constructs, delicate illusions maintained by habit, consensus, and necessity. When logic collapses, it does so quietly at first, like the subtle cracking of ice beneath your feet. The familiar frameworks of cause and effect start to tremble. Statements you once considered irrefutable now reveal cracks, contradictions you never noticed before whispering in the spaces between certainty and doubt. If you follow reason step by step, carefully, meticulously, it leads you not to understanding but to a labyrinth of impossibilities. Each principle you rely on bends inward, reflecting another truth that cannot coexist with it. You feel the mind's scaffolding wobble, a vertigo not of the body but of cognition itself. Consider paradoxes, those infamous anomalies that expose the limits of structured thought. The more you analyze them, the more tangled they become, folding in on themselves like Mobius strips of reasoning. Statements can be simultaneously true and false. Beginnings lead to endings that are also beginnings, and definitions collapse into infinite regress. You realize that logic, far from being an absolute law, is a map drawn by limited consciousness to navigate an infinite landscape. It is a tool, and like all tools, it has edges. Beyond those edges lies the realm where understanding, certainty, and reason dissolve into possibility itself. This collapse is not merely intellectual, it is existential. When the mind trusts logic as the final arbiter of truth, it assumes a foundation exists. When that foundation fractures, every belief, every memory, every certainty feels suddenly precarious. The universe that seemed orderly becomes a vast, vibrating uncertainty. You notice it in subtle ways, contradictions in perception, fleeting inconsistencies in memory, patterns that defy explanation. Logic, once a comforting structure, transforms into a cage, and now you see its bars not as protective, but limiting. The collapse is not violent, it is insidious. It seeps into thought like water through a crack, reshaping the contours of perception without warning. And yet, paradoxically, the collapse of logic is also liberating. It frees the mind from rigid constraints, allowing it to explore concepts that would otherwise be dismissed as impossible. You begin to see connections where none seem to exist, to understand that reality may operate on principles beyond comprehension, that causality is not absolute, but context-dependent, that the universe may obey rules we cannot even articulate. In this sense, the failure of logic is not destruction, it is an invitation. It asks you to venture beyond what can be proven, beyond the neat boundaries of cause and consequence, into a space where thought itself becomes an experiment, where questioning replaces certainty as the measure of understanding. Yet the mind struggles. Humans are conditioned to trust consistency, to find meaning in predictable patterns, to seek refuge in structured reasoning. When logic collapses, it triggers fear as much as awe. You feel unmoored, as though the mental ground beneath you has dissolved, leaving only the void. Anxiety creeps in, a natural response to the realization that reason, the guide we depend on, is provisional, fragile, and ultimately incomplete. This is why encountering the breakdown of logic is often unsettling. It forces a confrontation with the impermanence of knowledge, the instability of perception, and the fallibility of consciousness itself. Even science, often regarded as the pinnacle of rational inquiry, cannot escape this collapse entirely. Every law is conditional. every model and approximation, every theorem bounded by assumptions. Observers discover phenomena that defy prediction, experiments that contradict expectation, realities that appear inconsistent with established principles. And yet, rather than despairing, the mind learns to navigate these cracks, to understand that the instability of logic is not a failure, but a reflection of the universe's vastness, complexity, and resistance to simplification. Logic is a compass, but it is not the territory. When it collapses, it reveals the wild, uncharted landscape beyond maps and formulas. In this wilderness, the impossible question from the first section begins to take shape. Its power lies precisely in exposing the collapse of reason, in demonstrating that every attempt to define it through logic will eventually fail. Here, thought becomes recursive, each reasoning spiraling into its own undoing. Cause and effect invert, certainties unravel, and the mind realizes that understanding is not linear but a fractal, an infinite regression of questions contained within questions. Logic collapses not to destroy thought, but to prepare it for the incomprehensible, to stretch consciousness to its limits so that it may glimpse the universe not as a machine of rules, but as a vast resonant enigma. And so, to witness the collapse of logic is both terrifying and exhilarating. It is an awakening to the fragility of certainty and the vastness of possibility. In the void left by collapsing reason, the mind begins to see that what we consider real is a fragile arrangement of patterns, expectations, and assumptions, and that beyond these lies a universe where the impossible question can exist, where thought itself can be both the prisoner and the explorer. Logic collapses, but in that collapse, consciousness awakens to its own infinitude. Imagine asking a question and discovering that every answer leads to another question, which leads to yet another, in a cycle that stretches beyond comprehension. This is the nature of the infinite loop of inquiry, a spiral of thought with no beginning and no end, a Mobius path where curiosity becomes both the guide and the prison. Once you enter, your mind begins to orbit a central impossibility, circling endlessly, compelled to follow each answer into deeper uncertainty. The more you try to resolve it, the further the resolution recedes, as if the act of understanding itself fuels the perpetuation of the loop. This is not a metaphor. The infinite loop is a real pattern of consciousness, a structure embedded in the way minds attempt to comprehend the incomprehensible. Logic, reason, and knowledge become recursive, echoing back upon themselves in subtle, disorienting ways. You may think you have arrived at clarity, only to realize that each resolution contains seeds of contradiction. Each explanation opens new dimensions of uncertainty. Questions beget answers, and answers beget new questions, until the mind is caught in a perpetual oscillation between knowing and unknowing. Consider the classical paradoxes. Zeno's arrow, which never reaches its target, because the distance it must traverse can always be halved again and again. The liar paradox, which declares its own falsehood, trapping truth within an endless cycle of contradiction. These are not mere curiosities, they are the fingerprints of the infinite loop, evidence that inquiry, when pushed to its extreme, inevitably curves back upon itself. To follow these paths is to experience a strange simultaneity. Each question feels like progress, yet no progress is ever final. The loop is eternal, a fractal of thought without boundary or terminus. The psychological effect is profound. Those caught in the loop report a peculiar vertigo, a sensation of being suspended in a space where cause and effect, beginning and end, certainty and doubt, blur into one continuous motion. Time itself seems to bend, stretching and compressing around the pattern of inquiry. You realize that thought is not linear, that understanding is not a ladder to be climbed, but a spiral that coils infinitely, and that the very act of questioning is both the prison and the key. This infinite loop also reveals something essential about the universe, that perhaps reality itself is structured like a question, unfolding recursively across scales, from the subatomic to the cosmic. Each layer reflects and refracts the other, like a hall of mirrors where cause and effect, existence and non-existence, observer and observed, are entwined in recursive interplay. When the mind encounters the infinite loop, it glimpses a universe where resolution is optional, where the journey of thought is the only destination, and where each attempt at comprehension becomes an integral part of the pattern itself. To dwell in this loop is both exhilarating and exhausting. You feel a heightened awareness of the interconnections between phenomena, the subtle echoes that ripple through consciousness, the way ideas resonate across time and space. Yet at the same time there is a nagging frustration, a recognition that every answer is provisional, every insight temporary, and every conclusion merely a waypoint in a perpetual cycle. The loop offers no rest, only the rhythmic cadence of inquiry, like an eternal tide pulling the mind along unseen currents. Some attempt to escape, seeking closure in certainty or distraction in familiarity. Others embrace the loop fully, surrendering to the flow of questions, observing each answer as it arises and dissolves, and allowing themselves to be carried deeper into the recursive architecture of thought. Those who immerse themselves in the infinite loop begin to see that understanding is not a destination, that knowledge is not a finite object, and that the infinite spiral is not a trap, but a gateway to a broader awareness. In this state, consciousness expands, attuned to patterns that elude conventional reasoning, capable of perceiving the fractal elegance of impossibility itself. Yet, even immersion has its paradoxical dangers. The infinite loop can subtly distort perception, eroding confidence in memory, in logic, in the reliability of the senses. The mind learns to expect contradiction as natural, inconsistency as inevitable, and uncertainty as permanent. This is disorienting, but it is also clarifying. It strips away the illusions of stability, revealing the underlying patterns of thought and reality as they truly exist. To live in the loop is to recognize that certainty is provisional, that every explanation is temporary, and that the act of inquiry is itself an essential component of existence. Ultimately, the infinite loop of inquiry is not a problem to be solved. It is a phenomenon to be experienced. Its power lies in its ability to expand consciousness, to reveal the recursive nature of thought, and to prepare the mind for encounters with impossibility. Every question that arises within the loop is both a continuation of what came before, and a prelude to what comes next. A dance between knowing and unknowing that stretches across the landscape of perception. The loop is endless, unyielding and sublime, a reflection of the infinite possibilities embedded within reality itself. To engage with the infinite loop is to step into a space where curiosity is both compass and horizon, where thought flows without end, and where consciousness begins to mirror the universe's boundless complexity. It is a place of paradox, revelation, and quiet awe. It is here in the spiraling corridors of questioning that the impossible begins to take shape, and where the mind first glimpses the profound vulnerability and resilience of understanding. Before the first tick of a clock, before the first heartbeat of the cosmos, there was a silence that stretched beyond comprehension, a realm unshaped by sequence, untouched by cause and effect. To consider time before time existed is to step into a paradox so profound that language itself falters. How do you describe something that has no beginning, no progression, no measurement? How do you imagine a before when there is no after? And yet, to confront this realm is to confront the very foundation of existence, the invisible canvas upon which all reality is painted. This is not a mental abstraction alone. It is a confrontation with the limits of perception. Our consciousness is wired to experience events sequentially, cause, effect, then reflection. Without time, these markers vanish. There is no past to remember, no future to anticipate, no present to experience. Even the concept of change loses meaning, for change is defined by temporal difference. And yet, paradoxically, from this timeless nothingness all things arise, the universe, matter, energy, space, and eventually consciousness itself. It is the womb of creation and the void of eternity, simultaneously. Philosophers and mystics have long attempted to glimpse this timeless state, often describing it in terms of stillness, emptiness, or absolute unity. Yet, every metaphor falls short, because time is the lens through which we perceive, and without it, perception itself becomes impossible. To imagine a moment before time is to attempt a thought that the mind is not equipped to hold fully. You sense an abyss, a space without edge, a depth without limit, and yet in that abyss lies the potential for everything. It is here that the impossible question begins to take root. For if time itself is not yet defined, then what does it mean to ask, to seek, or even to exist? Consider the paradox of causality. Everything we know relies on sequences. Cause leads to effect, past leads to present, present to future. But in a realm where these sequences do not yet exist, causality collapses. There is no chain of events, no chain of logic, no chain of thought. And yet, somehow, from this boundless stillness, the first quiver of existence emerges. The universe does not arrive fully formed, but manifests as an unfolding, a self-generating emergence that challenges every assumption about beginnings. It is as if reality itself asks, what does it mean to begin when no beginning exists? This state, unimaginable as it is, reverberates through the structure of the cosmos. Every event, every interaction, every perception carries echoes of this primordial timelessness. Within the atoms, the galaxies, and the consciousness that observes them, there lingers a trace of that ineffable pre-time state, a reminder that temporality is not absolute, but a lens imposed upon the infinite. You begin to sense that time is not a container of events, but a narrative constructed by perception, a framework that renders chaos intelligible. And when you glimpse the reality beneath this narrative, you see that time itself is a delicate illusion suspended over the void. The paradox deepens when consciousness enters the picture. Minds are temporal by nature. Thoughts flow in sequence, memories anchor the present to the past, and intentions project it into the future. But what if consciousness were to exist in a state without temporal reference? What would it mean to think, to be, to exist without before or after? You sense a profound dissonance. The self, as you know it, is inseparable from the flow of time. Remove the river of moments, and the self dissolves into an ineffable awareness, a silent witness to existence that has no duration. In this way, the state before time is both terrifying and sublime. It removes all certainty, while revealing the infinite potential from which certainty eventually emerges. Even physics hints at this paradox. Cosmologists speak of the singularity preceding the Big Bang, a state where conventional laws of space and time break down. It is a concept that strains imagination, an arena where the mathematics of existence encounter their own limits. From this singularity, time begins in a sense, but even this beginning is not absolute. It is defined only relative to the emergence of space, matter, and energy. The universe, in other words, may be rooted in timelessness, and our perception of temporal flow is but a derivative phenomenon, a shadow of the primordial eternity that birthed it. To dwell on the notion of time before time is to confront the impossible question at the heart of reality. If temporality is not fundamental, what is? What is the substrate beneath existence itself, the hidden framework that allows being to emerge from nothingness? It is a question that defies closure, that cannot be answered through measurement, observation, or even intuition. And yet, it is the very question that propels consciousness forward, driving inquiry into realms that surpass ordinary understanding. Ultimately, contemplating time before time forces a recognition of our own limitations and the grandeur of existence beyond perception. It reveals that every moment, every thought, every flicker of awareness is a transient manifestation against the backdrop of infinite possibility. It is here, in this confrontation with timelessness, that you first sense the fragility and brilliance of understanding itself. The mind is both limited and extraordinary, capable of grasping only fragments of what lies beyond the sequence of moments. In this way, time before time existed is not merely a theoretical puzzle. It is the threshold of comprehension, the point where thought encounters the infinite, the void, and the impossible. To approach it is to stand at the edge of being, to gaze into a space without measure, and to realize that the universe, consciousness, and even inquiry itself emerge from this silent, boundless prelude to all that is, all that was, and all that could ever be. Consciousness is often described as the silent witness to reality, the lens through which the universe perceives itself. But what happens when consciousness turns inward, attempting to observe its own observing? This is the paradox of self-reflective awareness, a recursive trap where the mind becomes both subject and object, the observer and the observed. In trying to fully comprehend itself, consciousness encounters a boundary that cannot be crossed. To know itself completely would require stepping outside itself, and yet there is no outside. Every attempt at absolute self-understanding loops back into the observer, fracturing certainty and revealing the limits of introspection. At first, this paradox seems abstract, a curiosity for philosophers and neuroscientists, but its implications are profound. The moment consciousness attempts to examine itself, it introduces a subtle distortion. Thoughts about thoughts emerge, reflections upon reflections, until the process becomes a hall of mirrors in which certainty is impossible. You ask who is observing, and the question spirals. Is it the self as it was, as it is, or as it perceives itself to be? Each answer contains another observer, and each observer contains yet another layer, stretching infinitely into a conceptual horizon that the mind cannot reach. The paradox manifests in everyday experience more subtly than one might expect. When you reflect on your own decisions, when you analyze your motivations, when you attempt to know yourself, you are engaging with this recursive loop. You feel insight, yet it is partial, understanding, yet incomplete. The deeper you probe, the more elusive certainty becomes. You may recognize patterns in thought and behavior, yet the recognition itself changes the observed. Self-awareness influences cognition, reshaping the very process you are trying to map. The act of observation alters the observed, creating an infinite feedback cycle that resists closure. This phenomenon is not merely psychological, it is existential. Consciousness, by its nature, is temporally and spatially embedded. Memories anchor it to the past, intentions propel it toward the future, and the body situates it within space. Yet the attempt to fully observe oneself transcends these anchors. The mind becomes simultaneously temporal and atemporal, localized and infinite, knowing and unknowable. Every reflective thought generates another, like ripples on an endless pond, and the pond itself is consciousness. The paradox lies in the impossibility of seeing the totality while being part of it, a conundrum as old as awareness itself. Philosophers like Descartes and Hegel have wrestled with this paradox, exploring the recursive nature of self-consciousness. Descartes' "I think, therefore I am" captures a fragment of the problem. The act of thinking confirms existence, but does it reveal the totality of the thinker? Hegel suggested that self-consciousness emerges through interaction with the world and others. It is not fully present in isolation. In modern neuroscience, attempts to map self-awareness confront similar limits. Observing the brain changes the brain. Modeling cognition alters cognition. The paradox is universal. Consciousness cannot fully step outside itself, and yet it is compelled to explore the infinite regress of observation. At the experiential level, this paradox evokes both awe and discomfort. There is an undeniable thrill in glimpsing the recursive architecture of mind, the realization that every thought contains layers of perception, every memory refracts awareness, every feeling is part of a vast self-referential system. Yet, there is also disquiet, a subtle vertigo born from the awareness that you can never fully know the self that is observing, that there will always be an unknowable dimension lurking beyond introspection. It is a tension between insight and limitation, between the desire for comprehension and the impossibility of total clarity. The paradox of consciousness observing itself also shapes the very nature of identity. The self is a construct, emerging from the interplay of perception, reflection, and memory. Attempting to fully observe this construct reveals that identity is simultaneously stable and fluid, coherent and fragmented. You are aware of yourself in layers, as you think you are, as others perceive you, as your mind perceives itself, and as the infinite regress of observation twists these perceptions. The result is a complex, dynamic system that is never fully knowable, yet fully real, a living paradox at the heart of existence. In this space, the impossible question begins to intertwine with consciousness. To ask a question that breaks the universe is also to observe oneself asking it. The act of inquiry mirrors the structure of mind itself. Each layer of reflection amplifies the paradox. The observer observes observing, and the cycle stretches infinitely. There is no final vantage point, no ultimate comprehension. The mind glimpses infinity through the lens of self-awareness, and in that glimpse it encounters both the limitations of thought and the boundless potential of understanding. Ultimately, the paradox of consciousness observing itself is not a problem to be solved, but a mirror to be contemplated. It reveals the intricate architecture of thought, the recursive nature of awareness, and the impossibility of total self-comprehension. To dwell in this paradox is to embrace the tension between knowing and unknowing, to witness the infinite regress of reflection, and to understand that consciousness is both the prisoner and the explorer of its own depths. In this paradox, the impossible question finds fertile ground, for only a mind aware of its own infinite complexity can begin to sense the profound mystery at the heart of reality itself. What is reality if there is no one to perceive it? This question lingers at the edge of consciousness, teasing the mind with the unsettling possibility that existence itself depends upon observation. We tend to believe that the universe is vast, objective, and indifferent, that planets orbit, stars burn, and atoms collide regardless of whether anyone watches. And yet, when we peer deeper into the nature of perception, consciousness, and quantum uncertainty, a subtle, unnerving idea emerges. Perhaps reality is incomplete, undefined, or even unreal until it is witnessed. Imagine a universe entirely empty of observers. Stars blaze and collapse, galaxies spin in grand arcs, and yet there is no consciousness to record, interpret, or experience these events. Do they exist in the same sense that we consider existence? Without witnesses, without minds to anchor phenomena, the very concept of reality begins to dissolve. It is not that objects vanish, but that their meaning, their presence in a perceptual framework, ceases to be defined. The act of observation, once considered trivial, is suddenly central to the fabric of existence. This idea finds echoes in modern physics, particularly in quantum mechanics. At the subatomic level, particles exist in a haze of probability, neither here nor there, until observed. The famous thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat demonstrates this vividly. A system in superposition exists in multiple states simultaneously, only collapsing into one definite state when measured. While physicists caution against equating observation with consciousness in a mystical sense, the principle suggests a profound truth. The act of witnessing transforms potential into actuality. Observation is not merely passive, it is participatory, shaping the unfolding of reality itself. Philosophers have long debated similar questions. George Berkeley, for example, proposed idealism, arguing that to be is to be perceived. Without minds to perceive, objects have no existence independent of consciousness. While this idea may seem abstract, it forces a confrontation with the delicate interplay between mind and world. If perception matters, if observation is integral to existence, then reality without witnesses is no longer a neutral backdrop. It is an undefined canvas, waiting to be realized. The existential implications are staggering. You begin to see that your very experience of the world is not separate from it. Your perception participates in the emergence of reality. Every sensation, every observation, every act of attention becomes a small but fundamental act of creation. To wonder about reality without witnesses is to wonder about the fragility of existence, the invisible threads connecting consciousness to cosmos, the way awareness gives structure to chaos. Without someone to see, hear, or think, the universe may continue in some raw, undefined form, but it is no longer the universe as it is experienced. It is a shadow of itself, a blueprint of potentiality, a silence that hints at meaning without ever fully articulating it. This notion also challenges our understanding of time. If reality depends upon observation, then time itself becomes relative to consciousness. Moments unfold not merely in sequential order, but in relation to the awareness that perceives them. Events that go unnoticed may exist differently than events that are witnessed. Memory, too, becomes essential. The act of recalling an event reaffirms its place in reality, extending its existence beyond the fleeting instant. Observation and remembrance weave together, forming the temporal tapestry through which reality manifests. At a personal level, this idea can be both liberating and terrifying. It suggests that you are not a passive traveler through existence, but an active participant, shaping reality simply by perceiving it. Every thought, every perception, every act of attention resonates outward, interacting with a universe that is not fixed, but fluid and responsive. Yet the thought of reality without witnesses evokes vertigo. If all observation were to cease, if all consciousness vanished, what would remain? Does the cosmos continue as before, or does it fade into an undefined potential, a silence too vast to comprehend? Art and literature have explored this theme intuitively for centuries. Stories of unseen worlds, of invisible observers, of hidden realities, reflect a deep human intuition that perception matters, that reality is inseparable from the minds that experience it. Our sense of meaning, our understanding of cause and effect, even our identity itself, relies on being witnessed, not merely by others, but by the self observing the self. Awareness is the bridge between potential and existence. Without it, the universe becomes a landscape without light, a song without sound, a thought without a thinker. Ultimately, contemplating reality without witnesses is to confront the profound intimacy between mind and cosmos. It is to recognize that existence is not merely a mechanical unfolding but a co-creation, a dialogue between perception and being. The impossible question surfaces here too. If no one perceives the universe, does it exist as it truly is, or only as it could be perceived? The answer is elusive, and perhaps that is the point. In this tension between existence and perception, certainty dissolves, leaving only awareness, your awareness, standing at the center of the cosmos, both observing and defining the reality around you. In this space, the universe feels fragile, vast and mysterious. Each blink of attention, each fleeting thought becomes an act of participation, a small affirmation that something is real, that something exists. Without witnesses, reality teeters on the edge of potential, undefined, waiting, and in acknowledging this, you glimpse the extraordinary paradox of consciousness and cosmos. Reality is not merely a stage upon which events unfold, it is a living interplay between being and perception, observer and observed, mind and universe. What if the universe itself is not a collection of facts, objects and events, but a question? Not a question posed in words, but a living, breathing inquiry, whose answer is never complete, never final. To imagine the cosmos in this way is to step beyond observation into participation, to sense that every star, every particle, every wave of energy is part of a vast interrogation. a query cast across existence itself. The universe does not simply exist. It asks, it probes, it beckons the mind to engage with its impossible intricacies, and in responding, consciousness becomes entangled in the question it never fully resolves. When you look at the night sky, you are not just seeing light, you are encountering the echo of the universe questioning itself. Galaxies swirl and collide, not merely as matter obeying laws, but as part of a greater enigma, a structure that invites reflection and wonder. Every cosmic event is a node in this ongoing inquiry, a punctuation in a sentence that has no ending. The universe does not answer in clarity, but in patterns, in relationships, in phenomena that compel the mind to ask why, how, what does this mean? Each observation becomes both a question and an answer, a recursive dialogue between reality and perception. This concept challenges everything we take for granted about existence. We assume the universe is an object, something out there to be studied and catalogued, something static and knowable. But if the cosmos is a question, then observation is not merely passive, it is interactive. To engage with the universe is to participate in its inquiry, to contribute to its unfolding. Every experiment, every thought, every act of perception becomes part of the dialogue, a way of exploring a question that has no ultimate resolution. In this sense, you are not merely in the universe is within you, and you are within it, entwined in an eternal questioning. The idea resonates deeply in philosophy, as well as science. Thinkers have suggested that reality is structured less as a collection of immutable laws and more as a network of relationships, interactions, and potentialities. Quantum physics, in particular, hints at this view. Particles do not exist in definite states until measured. Probabilities collapse into actuality only in response to observation. The universe does not answer objectively, but dynamically, its form contingent upon engagement. Reality is a dialogue, not a declaration, and consciousness is its interlocutor. Even on a smaller scale, the universe as a question is visible in the structure of complexity itself. Life emerges from chaos, intelligence arises from simplicity, and self-awareness grows from networks of interactions. Each of these phenomena seems to reflect a probing impulse, a subtle way in which the cosmos experiments with itself. Evolution, cognition, and culture can be seen as questions cast into existence. Will this persist? Will this adapt? Will this observe and reflect? In this sense, you too are part of the universe's ongoing inquiry, a conscious answer seeking the next question. To contemplate this is to confront both wonder and discomfort. The mind craves closure, a sense of completeness, an end to uncertainty. Yet if the universe is a question, there is no finality, no ultimate answer. You are confronted with the infinite, the question that unfolds endlessly across time and space, shaping and reshaping reality as it moves. Each insight gained is only a stepping stone to the next layer of inquiry, each answer a doorway to deeper, more complex questions. This endlessness is both humbling and exhilarating. In recognizing the universe as a question, the impossible begins to reveal itself. What, after all, is the nature of a question without end? How can a mind bound by time and logic engage with infinity? Here lies the delicate paradox. The universe asks, consciousness responds, yet neither reaches a final resolution. The dialogue stretches across scales from subatomic particles to galaxies, from the flicker of thought in a human brain to the vastness of interstellar space. Every observation, every act of awareness, participates in the inquiry, yet the question itself is never exhausted. And so, to live in a universe that is a question, is to embrace uncertainty as a fundamental condition of being. You begin to see patterns not as solutions but as invitations, phenomena not as statements but as prompts, existence itself not as a fact but as an unfolding inquiry. The cosmos becomes a mirror, reflecting the questions within your own mind while simultaneously posing its own. You are both observer and participant, witness and contributor, question and answer, intertwined in an eternal dance. Ultimately, the universe as a question reminds us of our place in the grand enigma. We are not detached spectators charting the motions of matter. We are conscious nodes in a network of inquiry, minds capable of recognizing the infinite curiosity embedded in existence. To perceive, to reflect, to wonder, is to participate in the question itself. In this awareness, the impossible becomes tangible, not as a problem to be solved, but as a journey to be lived, an ongoing dialogue between consciousness and the cosmos, between the mind and the unfathomable, between the seeker and the infinite inquiry that surrounds us. At first glance, matter seems simple, solid, unquestioning, rocks, stars, and atoms, all obeying the laws of physics without hesitation. But peel back the layers of reality, and an astonishing thought emerges. What if matter itself, in its most fundamental form, contains the potential for self-reflection, a hidden capacity to question its own being? This is not literal consciousness in the human sense, but a deeper, more abstract paradox. The universe is structured in such a way that existence is both automatic and aware, deterministic, yet infinitely pliable. Matter in this sense becomes a mirror of the impossible question, a participant in its own inquiry. Consider the behavior of subatomic particles. Electrons do not have fixed positions. They exist as probabilities spreading across space in waves of potentiality. Only when observed do these probabilities collapse into a measurable state. The particle seems to choose a position, though the choice is not conscious. It is the universe's method of self-definition. Even the laws that govern matter, gravity, electromagnetism, and nuclear forces, are not static decrees but frameworks that allow possibilities to unfold. In this sense, matter is not inert. It embodies potential, ambiguity, and responsiveness. Its existence is a dialogue between being and definition, a continuous process of asking what it is and how it will manifest. From atoms to galaxies, the patterns of matter suggest more than passive behavior. Complexity arises spontaneously. Stars form and die, chemical reactions give rise to life, and intelligence emerges from networks of neurons. The universe, composed of these units of matter, seems to orchestrate phenomena that are simultaneously predetermined and astonishingly creative. It is as if matter is continuously testing itself, probing the boundaries of possibility, unfolding in ways that are both predictable and surprising. In this sense, the cosmos itself reflects a fundamental curiosity, a drive to explore its own potential. This notion challenges conventional ideas of objectivity. If matter questions itself, then the universe is not merely a stage upon which life and consciousness act. It is an active participant in its own unfolding. Rocks, rivers, stars, and even the fundamental particles of existence become part of an invisible inquiry, a process through which reality defines, tests, and reshapes itself. Observation, perception, and interaction are not external impositions, but components of a dialogue embedded in the structure of existence. The universe, in a profound way, participates in its own definition. The philosophical implications are staggering. Ancient thinkers often imagined the cosmos as a living, breathing entity. Modern science, while cautious about anthropomorphizing, hints at a related truth: self-organization, emergent behavior, and the delicate interplay of order and chaos, all point to a universe capable of exploring itself. Life is not a random anomaly, but an expression of this self-questioning consciousness emerges from matter, and in doing so, matter observes itself indirectly, reflecting on the patterns and possibilities it has generated. The impossible question, then, is embedded in the substance of the universe, present in every quark, photon, and molecule. This idea also reframes the relationship between consciousness and matter. Humans often see themselves as separate from the physical world, imposing observation onto an inert stage. Yet, if matter is inherently participatory, if it embodies potential and responsiveness, then consciousness is not separate but a continuation of this process. When you observe, reflect, or interact, you are joining a chain of inquiry that begins with matter itself. Your awareness is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a node in the ongoing dialogue of existence, a continuation of the universe questioning itself. Even on the grandest scale, the patterns of matter reveal this subtle self-inquiry. Galaxies spin in arcs that balance chaos and structure. Planets follow paths determined by forces yet infused with emergent unpredictability. Life arises in pockets of complexity that defy mere chance. Each level of organization reflects a process of exploration, a probing of what is possible. Matter is not simply there, it is continuously negotiating its form, its interactions, its very existence. In a universe where matter questions itself, every structure, every pattern, every phenomenon is a small answer to a much larger, impossible question. Yet the paradox deepens. If matter can question, then so too does it encounter uncertainty, ambiguity, and potential contradiction. The universe contains vast regions of unpredictability, chaotic systems, quantum indeterminacy, and emergent complexity that defy reduction. This uncertainty is not weakness. It is the hallmark of a cosmos engaged in self-inquiry. The very laws of physics, far from being rigid constraints, are tools enabling exploration. Matter's questions manifest as possibilities, experiments and phenomena that push the boundaries of what can exist, what can be observed, and what can be known. Ultimately, to perceive matter as questioning itself is to see the universe in a profoundly participatory light. Nothing is inert, nothing is static, nothing exists merely as a passive fact. Every particle, every atom, every structure embodies potential, responsiveness and inquiry. Consciousness, life, and observation are not anomalies, they are extensions of matter's intrinsic dialogue with itself. In this perspective, the impossible question is woven into the very fabric of reality. Matter is aware, in a subtle, abstract sense, that it is being, that it exists, and that existence itself is a question that must unfold endlessly, in infinite forms, across infinite scales. There is a moment, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when thought approaches a limit, a boundary where reasoning falters, where logic trembles, and where the mind senses the contours of the impossible. This is the edge of the impossible, the threshold beyond which understanding cannot proceed without fracturing, the point where certainty dissolves into infinite possibility. It is a place of tension, paradox, and vertigo, where curiosity and fear intertwine, and where the very act of questioning becomes both a journey and a risk. To approach this edge is to confront the limitations of perception. Every framework, every system, every structure that organizes knowledge begins to collapse. Cause and effect blur. Time and space become flexible. Existence itself appears unstable. Here, the mind is forced to recognize that the universe does not yield to expectation or comprehension. It is not malevolent or chaotic in a conventional sense. It simply is. The edge is not a wall but a horizon, one that recedes the closer you come, revealing the boundless vastness of what cannot be fully grasped. Philosophers, mathematicians, and physicists have long encountered this boundary. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, for example, show that even within rigorous logical systems, there are truths that cannot be proven from within the system itself. Quantum mechanics reveals phenomena that defy classical logic, particles in superposition, entanglement that transcends space, uncertainty that limits precision. At the edge of the impossible, every assumption is challenged, every certainty questioned, and every explanation becomes provisional. Knowledge is not destroyed, but it becomes simultaneously fragile and exhilarating, a fragile raft on the currents of the infinite. The edge of the impossible is also deeply psychological. It triggers a unique awareness, a heightened sensitivity to the fragility of understanding. When you confront questions that cannot be answered, paradoxes that cannot be resolved, or phenomena that cannot be fully explained, the mind experiences a subtle vertigo, a recognition of its own limitations. Yet within this discomfort lies liberation. To encounter the impossible is to glimpse the infinite, to touch the outermost reaches of possibility, and to realize that understanding is not a fixed state, but a dynamic, ever-expanding process. This edge is not merely theoretical. It exists in every act of deep inquiry, when consciousness examines itself, when matter observes its own unfolding, when the universe presents questions with no ultimate resolution, the edge emerges. It is the thin line between knowing and unknowing, between order and chaos, between the familiar and the incomprehensible. To linger here is to engage in a delicate dance. Curiosity draws you forward, while the vastness of the unknown warns you of the mind's limitations. Every insight gained is tempered by the awareness that greater mysteries remain, and every answer encountered is a doorway to deeper questions. In many ways, the edge of the impossible is a crucible of creativity. It is here that imagination stretches beyond convention, that thought explores what cannot be modeled, and that consciousness becomes aware of its own boundless potential. Artists, scientists, and thinkers throughout history have skirted this edge, pushing the limits of understanding in pursuit of insight. The edge challenges the mind to embrace paradox, uncertainty, and ambiguity, not as failures, but as essential aspects of reality. It is a space where the impossible becomes an invitation, a threshold demanding both humility and courage. Time itself behaves differently at this boundary. Linear sequences, familiar before and afters, begin to blur. Moments expand and contract, past and future fold upon one another, and the present becomes a liminal space of infinite potential. The edge is not a fixed point but a region, a dynamic frontier where perception, cognition, and reality intersect in complex, unpredictable ways. To step close to it is to recognize the limits of measurement, the limitations of language, and the provisional nature of knowledge itself. At the edge, paradox is not merely tolerated, it becomes essential. Every attempt to resolve the impossible generates new questions, and every answer illuminates further layers of uncertainty. The mind begins to understand that boundaries are not rigid, they are conceptual constructs, flexible and mutable. The edge is not an obstacle to be overcome, but a landscape to be explored, a space where inquiry and imagination intersect, and where the mind can glimpse the underlying infinity of possibility. Ultimately, the edge of the impossible is both terrifying and sublime. It confronts you with the limits of comprehension, while revealing the vastness beyond, the horizon of what can never be fully known, but can always be imagined. It is a threshold that invites exploration without promise of resolution, a place where the impossible becomes a mirror reflecting the infinite complexity of reality and consciousness. To stand at this edge is to be fully present to the enigma of existence, to feel the vertigo of unknowing, and to recognize that every question, every thought, and every act of observation is a step along the boundary of the infinite. Here, the impossible question thrives. It waits at the frontier of understanding, revealing the vastness of what cannot be grasped, and the subtle brilliance of what can be intuited. It is a reminder that the mind, though finite, can engage with infinity, and that the universe, though boundless, communicates through paradox, uncertainty, and the delicate invitation of the unknown. To encounter the edge of the impossible is to touch the sublime, to witness the limits of reason, and to participate in the eternal dialogue between the known, the unknown, and the unanswerable. At the core of consciousness lies an astonishing power, the ability to conceive, imagine, and shape reality itself through thought. Every idea, every vision, every fleeting impulse is a potential seed, capable of bending perception and influencing the fabric of existence. The thought that creates worlds is not merely metaphorical, it is the mechanism by which consciousness interfaces with reality, translating intangible concepts into observable phenomena. To explore this is to confront a fundamental paradox. The mind is both infinitesimally small and cosmically potent, a singular locus of possibility that participates in the unfolding of the universe. Consider the act of imagining a landscape, a mountain peak, a glimmering river, a sky streaked with clouds. In that instant, the world exists within thought, governed by the mind's architecture, obeying no physical laws beyond those imposed by the imagination. The boundaries between what is and what could be dissolve. Every mental construct becomes a world unto itself, complete and internally consistent, yet entirely malleable. This is the first glimpse of the creative power inherent in consciousness, the ability to hold entire realities suspended in potential, to navigate infinite scenarios within a single mind. But the power of thought does not stop at imagination. Human consciousness demonstrates an extraordinary capacity to influence external reality. Every invention, every art form, every scientific discovery begins as a thought, a world conceived before it manifests. Bridges arise from calculations in the mind, novels spring from visions of imagined lives, and technologies unfold from patterns first traced in neurons. The thought that creates worlds is both intimate and universal. It begins within, yet it resonates outward, shaping collective perception, culture, and even the material universe. Philosophers and mystics have long explored this idea. Plato spoke of the realm of forms, where the essence of every object exists as an ideal before manifesting in the physical world. Eastern traditions suggest that consciousness is not merely a witness but a co-creator, that reality itself is a reflection of thought and awareness. Modern cognitive science hints at this too. Perception, memory, and imagination are inseparably linked, and the act of observing or thinking about a phenomenon influences the way it is integrated into experience. In essence, thought and reality are intertwined, a dance in which the observer is inseparable from the observed. The paradox deepens when we consider collective thought. Worlds are not created in isolation. Ideas ripple through minds, interacting, overlapping, and combining in unforeseen ways. Shared beliefs shape culture, economies, and civilizations. Myths give rise to values, rituals, and social structures. Human thought, in this sense, is not merely creative. It is generative. Every concept, every question, every philosophical or scientific inquiry participates in a network of creation, producing outcomes far beyond the reach of any single mind. The universe, in part, is sculpted by thought itself. Even at the scale of the impossible, this principle holds. Consider the questions that break understanding, the paradoxes that defy resolution. These thoughts push consciousness to its limits, forcing it to expand, restructure, and reimagine its frameworks. In grappling with the impossible, the mind generates new possibilities, new mental worlds that previously did not exist. The act of thinking beyond limits is itself an act of creation. it brings into existence landscapes of possibility that reality can never fully contain, yet which shape how reality is understood, perceived and navigated. Yet the thought that creates worlds is both liberating and dangerous. With this power comes responsibility, for ideas have consequences. Imagined worlds influence behavior, decisions, and even the structure of societies. Dreams unexamined can manifest as illusions. Fears can take form as obstacles, and ungrounded fantasies may distort perception. Consciousness is not passive. It participates in creation, whether consciously guided or unconsciously projected. To think is to shape, and to shape is to influence the unfolding of the universe in ways subtle and profound. At the most fundamental level, the power of thought reflects the intimate connection between consciousness and existence. The universe is not a static backdrop. It is responsive, interactive, and deeply entangled with minds capable of reflection, observation, and imagination. Every idea that arises is both a mirror and a tool, reflecting potential and exerting influence, shaping worlds both internal and external. Thought is the bridge between possibility and actuality, between the infinite landscape of what could be and the tangible reality that manifests around us. Ultimately, the thought that creates worlds reveals the profound mystery at the heart of consciousness. Within each mind lies the capacity to envision, to question, to shape, and to participate in the unfolding of reality itself. The impossible question, what defines existence? What makes reality real? Thrives in this space, for it is a thought that creates not only worlds in imagination, but worlds in understanding, perception, and the collective human experience. In recognizing this, one glimpses the sublime, the mind, infinitesimal, yet infinite, both observes and co-creates the universe, shaping reality through the act of thinking itself. In the ordinary flow of experience, cause precedes effect. One event triggers another. A stone falls because it was released. A tree grows because a seed was planted. Yet at the edge of understanding, at the frontier of the impossible question, this order becomes unstable. Imagine a reality where causes and effects loop into each other, where the origin of an event is both before and after the outcome it produces, and where linearity dissolves into paradox. This is the realm where cause becomes effect, a domain that challenges every assumption about time, sequence, and logic itself. To confront this is to confront the very structure of reasoning. If an effect can precede its cause, the foundations of prediction, analysis, and explanation begin to tremble. How can one understand an event if the trigger lies in its outcome? How can memory and anticipation function if cause and effect are entangled in loops rather than chains? In such a world, certainty evaporates, leaving only a delicate balance between perception and possibility, a space where intuition and reflection struggle to find purchase. Quantum physics offers glimpses of this strange domain. Phenomena like retrocausality, where a particle's future measurement can appear to influence its past state, suggest that at the most fundamental level, the universe does not adhere strictly to linear causation. Entangled particles behave in ways that defy conventional temporality. Changes in one seem to affect the other instantaneously, regardless of distance or the sequence of events. Here, cause and effect are not fixed categories but fluid relationships, dynamic and context-dependent. The universe itself hints at a logic that transcends sequential thinking. Philosophically, the implications are profound. Many traditions have suggested that the world is not merely a series of events, but a web of interdependent processes. In Buddhism, for instance, causality is understood as conditionality. Phenomena arise not in isolation, but in networks of interrelation, where beginnings and endings are relative rather than absolute. When cause becomes effect, we glimpse a universe where the distinction between past and future, origin and outcome, begins to blur, a cosmos in which every event is both consequence and precursor, both answer and question. At the human level, this paradox is reflected in perception and consciousness. Memory and expectation shape behavior in ways that alter outcomes, which in turn redefine memory and expectation. Choices made today ripple backward into the self that made them, and choices made yesterday resonate forward, transforming the present. The mind experiences this as reflection, regret, anticipation, and insight. But beneath these familiar sensations lies the profound recognition that our actions and their consequences are part of a recursive loop in which cause and effect constantly interchange roles. This inversion destabilizes conventional notions of responsibility and prediction. If causes are not always prior to their effects, then the trajectory of events cannot be fully foreseen, and outcomes cannot be assumed to be purely determined by prior conditions. Chaos and order coexist in a delicate tension, and the universe itself becomes a conversation rather than a machine. Each event resonates both forward and backward, weaving a complex tapestry in which every thread participates in both creation and consequence. The paradox deepens when applied to time itself. In linear experience, we mark moments as past, present, and future. Yet when cause can become effect, these divisions lose absolute meaning. The future can inform the past, just as the past informs the future. Memory, intention, and perception intermingle in ways that defy standard chronology. To think of events as strictly sequential becomes inadequate. Instead, we must imagine a network of influence where the trajectory of reality loops upon itself like a Mobius strip, endlessly folded and interdependent. Even cosmology hints at this inversion. Some theories of the universe, particularly those exploring cyclical or oscillating models, suggest that the cosmos may unfold in a series of expansions and contractions, where the end of one cycle seeds the beginning of the next. In such a system, the distinction between initial cause and final effect is blurred. Each cycle both follows and precedes the other, creating an eternal feedback loop in which the universe continually becomes itself. Cause and effect are not sequential, but mutually constitutive. At its deepest, this paradox invites humility and curiosity. To live in a world where cause becomes effect is to recognize that understanding is provisional, that certainty is elusive, and that the universe is infinitely more intricate than our models suggest. It is an invitation to perceive events not merely as steps along a path, but as nodes in a complex network, each influencing and being influenced, each origin and outcome simultaneously present in the fabric of reality. Ultimately, the phenomenon of cause becoming effect reflects the broader impossibility at the heart of existence. Linearity, certainty, and absolute understanding are illusions imposed on a reality that is recursive, interdependent, and paradoxical. To confront this inversion is to stand at the edge of comprehension, to recognize the fragile and mutable nature of causality, and to sense the extraordinary depth of a universe in which every effect carries within it the seed of its cause, and every cause is shaped by the outcomes it produces. Silence is often understood as the absence of sound, a pause between notes, a space where nothing seems to occur. Yet, at the edge of the impossible question, silence is far more than emptiness. It is an active presence, a medium through which the cosmos communicates, a subtle resonance in which worlds are born, truths are glimpsed, and consciousness listens to the unspoken rhythms of existence. The silence that speaks universes is paradoxical. It contains everything precisely because it contains nothing, revealing that the absence of noise is not the absence of reality, but a space in which the impossible emerges. In this silence, observation is magnified. When external distraction fades, the mind confronts the vastness within and without. Without the clutter of habitual thought, every subtle pattern, every resonance of being becomes perceptible. The silence is not passive, it interacts with consciousness, amplifying awareness and heightening perception. Here, a single thought can echo endlessly, reverberating through layers of mind and reality, revealing connections that were always present yet unnoticed. In this quiet, universes unfold, not as grand spectacles, but as subtle arrangements of potential, awaiting the attention to be acknowledged. The cosmos itself seems to operate through a similar principle. Vast stretches of space are silent to human senses, dark matter, interstellar voids, and the emptiness between galaxies. Yet within these silent expanses, forces operate, patterns emerge, and potentialities ripple unseen. Gravity pulls, energy pulses, and the seeds of stars lie dormant, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. The silence of space is not a void, but a canvas, a medium in which the universe conducts its most subtle experiments. The absence of overt activity is not absence of reality, it is the quiet from which everything manifests. Philosophers and mystics have long understood that silence carries a paradoxical power. In many spiritual traditions, silence is not merely the cessation of speech, but the presence of awareness, a gateway to understanding beyond the confines of language and reason. In silence, distinctions blur, self and other, mind and world, observer and observed. It is a space where ordinary causality softens, where time becomes flexible, and where the impossible question can resonate without the interference of conceptual noise. Silence becomes a medium in which the mind touches infinity. At the level of consciousness, the silence that speaks universes is intimately tied to attention. When the mind is quiet, subtle patterns emerge, the rhythm of thought, the interplay of memory and imagination, the recursive loops of reflection. Each moment of attention becomes a node in a vast network, linking perception to reality, self to cosmos, potential to manifestation. In this quiet, the mind experiences what it cannot, in the chatter of distraction, the paradoxical simultaneity of being and non-being, presence and absence, creation and observation. Silence also holds the paradox of communication. The most profound truths often emerge, not through assertion, but through absence. A pause, a look, a moment without words. The universe communicates in similar fashion. Stars do not speak, black holes do not proclaim, and yet in the patterns, echoes, and resonances, information is transmitted. Silence is both medium and message, revealing that the deepest realities operate below the level of explicit observation, in the spaces where attention can touch but language cannot fully capture. In the creative imagination, silence functions as a generative force. Composers, writers, and artists intuitively understand that gaps and pauses contain as much power as the notes or strokes themselves. The unspoken, the unseen, and the unsaid create conditions for emergence. In silence, possibilities form, like seeds lying dormant in fertile soil. Each act of attention, each engagement with quiet, can transform potential into reality, imagination into manifestation, thought into worlds. The universe itself seems to operate on this principle. Silence precedes creation, and in its subtle resonance, life, structure, and consciousness arise. The silence that speaks universes is also paradoxically intimate. It does not demand observation, yet it requires openness. It is both everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence that is often ignored because of its subtlety. Yet for those attuned to it, silence is eloquent, vibrant, and inexhaustible. It contains not only what exists, but what could exist, not only what is perceived, but what is waiting to be recognized. Within its stillness lies the possibility of understanding, the echo of the impossible question, and the subtle architecture of reality itself. Ultimately, this silence is a reminder that existence is not only noise, motion, and action. The universe is structured as much by absence as by presence, by pause as much as by movement, by subtlety as much as by clarity. To dwell in the silence that speaks universes is to participate in the co-creation of reality, to witness the impossible, and to sense the vast uncharted territories of potential that lie hidden in stillness. In listening to this silence, consciousness discovers that emptiness is not emptiness, that absence is not absence, and that the very pause between moments contains the seeds of infinite worlds. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every path stretches infinitely, where every choice gives rise to an endless network of outcomes, and where each possibility generates new possibilities in turn. This is the paradox of infinite possibilities, a reality in which potential is boundless, yet boundlessness itself becomes a trap for understanding. For in a universe where everything can happen, how can anything be certain? How can one action, one thought, one perception carry meaning, if every alternative also exists? The mind encounters here both liberation and vertigo, for infinite freedom is indistinguishable from paralysis. At the root of this paradox lies the nature of potentiality. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is not a rigid sequence of events, but a complex interplay of probabilities. Quantum physics illustrates this vividly. Particles exist in superpositions, embodying multiple states simultaneously, until interaction or observation collapses these probabilities into a particular outcome. In this sense, reality is not singular. It is a constellation of overlapping possibilities, each as real in potential as the outcome that eventually manifests. Existence, then, is a dance between actualization and infinite potential. Philosophically, the implications are staggering. If every action generates countless possibilities, then choice itself becomes both empowered and complicated. Free will, intuition, and decision-making are magnified into cosmic significance. Yet they are simultaneously destabilized by the infinite alternatives that shadow each moment. Every path chosen is balanced by unchosen paths, and every event that occurs is mirrored by countless unrealized events. Meaning is not eliminated, but it becomes fluid, relational, and paradoxical. The universe exists in a tension between what is and what could be. This paradox extends to consciousness itself. Minds are nodes of decision, awareness, and reflection, navigating an endlessly branching landscape of possibilities. Every thought can generate innumerable consequences, both outwardly in the world and inwardly within the structure of cognition. Memory, imagination, and anticipation each interact with possibility, creating a recursive loop. The mind considers one choice, imagines alternatives, reflects on outcomes, and reweaves reality continuously. Consciousness becomes a participant in a multiverse of potentialities, where observation and thought are as creative as action. The infinite possibilities also challenge causality and temporality. In a linear model, events follow in predictable chains. In a world of boundless potential, causality is entangled with probability. Every present moment contains traces of countless futures, each influencing perception, decision, and experience. Time, rather than being a fixed line, becomes a fluid web, in which every action, thought, and observation reverberates across multiple branches. The paradox emerges: the more possibilities exist, the harder it is to define any singular reality, yet without engagement with these possibilities, no reality manifests at all. Human experience reflects this tension. The mind craves choice and autonomy, yet too many possibilities overwhelm it. Decision-making becomes anxiety, reflection becomes indecision, and awareness becomes vertigo. Infinite possibilities are both liberating and terrifying. They expand the horizon of what can be, but they also dissolve the certainty of what is. The universe, in this paradoxical mode, is both playground and labyrinth, inviting exploration while simultaneously defying closure. Yet within the paradox lies profound creativity. Infinite possibilities allow for emergence, novelty, and transformation. Life, consciousness, and culture arise from the constant interplay of potentialities, the unceasing exploration of what can exist. Every innovation, every insight, every act of imagination is a manifestation of this dynamic. A single path chosen amidst infinite alternatives, a singular note within a symphony of unplayed notes. The impossible question thrives here. For every act of understanding simultaneously unveils new layers of complexity and reveals further unknowns. The paradox also illuminates the delicate relationship between determinism and chance. In a world of infinite possibilities, deterministic laws coexist with probabilistic outcomes, structure with freedom, and predictability with chaos. The universe is neither rigid nor random. It is a lattice of potential, continuously shaped by interactions, observations, and consciousness itself. Each choice, each observation, each act of awareness is a node in a vast web, participating in the unfolding of reality, while simultaneously navigating the infinite that surrounds it. Ultimately, the paradox of infinite possibilities is a mirror of the human condition. It reflects the tension between freedom and limitation, certainty and uncertainty, actuality and potential. Consciousness experiences itself as both empowered and humbled, capable of shaping reality, yet constrained by the boundless alternatives that unfold simultaneously. The impossible question lingers here. In a universe of infinite potential, what defines existence, meaning, or truth? And yet, within this tension, there is awe, creativity, and participation. The recognition that to engage with infinite possibilities is to engage directly with the living, unbounded, and enigmatic fabric of reality itself. Infinity is a concept that defies comprehension. It is not merely large or vast. It is unbounded, without limit, without finality. To the human mind conditioned by beginnings and ends, the infinite presents a paradox that cannot be fully resolved. It is a horizon that recedes the closer one approaches, a landscape whose scale is simultaneously overwhelming and incomprehensible. The mind that attempts to grasp infinity is confronted with the impossibility of containment. Every model, every analogy, every attempt to quantify or define the infinite inevitably falls short. In mathematics, infinity is both essential and elusive. Calculus relies on limits approaching infinity. Set theory categorizes infinite sets, and geometry can describe endless spaces. Yet no equation or theorem can fully embody infinity in a way that is intuitively accessible to human consciousness. It is abstract, abstracted, untouchable. The paradox is not merely intellectual, it is existential. The human brain is a finite organ, designed to operate within bounded contexts. Yet it is compelled to confront that which has no boundaries, a contradiction at the very heart of awareness. Philosophically, this confrontation reveals the limits of understanding. The mind seeks closure, patterns, and definitions. Infinity, by its nature, offers none. It expands without constraint, eluding every attempt at capture. This is the paradox of cognition. The more the mind strives to comprehend the infinite, the more apparent its own limitations become. To think about infinity is to think about what cannot be fully thought, to imagine what cannot be fully imagined, and to reflect on what cannot be fully contained within perception. This struggle manifests in subtle psychological ways. When faced with vastness of space, time, or possibility, the mind experiences awe, vertigo, or even fear. The sensation of infinitude overwhelms the ordinary frameworks of perception, revealing the fragility of conceptual structures. Consciousness is like a vessel attempting to hold an ocean. The edges of understanding strain, overflow, and fracture. Infinity is not merely beyond comprehension. It reshapes the mind's relationship to itself, forcing recognition of its boundaries and its limitations. Yet, paradoxically, this confrontation with infinity is also profoundly generative. It inspires creativity, imagination, and exploration. Artists depict endless landscapes, writers construct worlds without edges, and scientists model universes beyond immediate observation. The impossibility of fully grasping infinity does not prevent engagement, it compels it. In this sense, the mind's limitation becomes the source of its deepest insight. Infinity cannot be fully known, but it can be intuited, explored, and reflected upon in ways that expand awareness beyond conventional boundaries. Infinity also challenges temporality. Human cognition is structured around sequences, past, present, future, but infinity operates outside linear constraints. Consider time itself. If the cosmos has no beginning or end, if matter and energy flow through cycles beyond comprehension, then the mind is forced to confront a reality without temporal anchors. Understanding becomes provisional, perception becomes tentative, and consciousness experiences both the expansion and the contraction of scale simultaneously. To grasp infinity is to face not only endless magnitude, but the impossibility of defining even the framework of comprehension. The mind that cannot grasp infinity also encounters paradox in knowledge. Every attempt to define, measure, or contain infinity generates new questions and deeper complexities. Knowledge is iterative, conditional, and relational. The more one learns, the more one realizes the vastness of what remains unknowable. Infinity is a mirror reflecting not just the universe but the limitations of cognition itself. To engage with it is to see the impossibility question writ large. The universe may be boundless, but the mind is necessarily finite, forever reaching toward what it can never fully hold. Yet, this impossibility need not be despairing. In fact, the tension between the finite mind and infinite reality is the very space in which wonder, reflection, and insight arise. Infinity reminds consciousness that limits are inherent, that existence is provisional, and that perception itself is a dynamic act of engagement, rather than a passive receipt of facts. To acknowledge the impossibility of fully grasping infinity is to embrace curiosity, openness, and the subtle beauty of not knowing. Ultimately, the mind that cannot grasp infinity illuminates a profound truth about existence. Comprehension is never complete, understanding is always partial, and the horizon of knowledge recedes as we approach it. Yet the pursuit itself is meaningful. Infinity challenges the mind not to solve it, but to expand within its presence, to navigate paradox, and to engage with reality in ways that honor both the limits of cognition and the vastness of possibility. The impossible question thrives here, in the tension between the finite and the infinite, offering a space where awareness stretches, where imagination soars, and where consciousness encounters the sublime unboundedness of existence itself. Time appears as a constant river, flowing steadily from past to future, measured in seconds, minutes, and years. Yet at the frontier of impossible inquiry, time begins to unravel. Certain questions that pierce the very structure of reality disrupt the linearity of chronology, exposing time as a malleable, recursive, and paradoxical phenomenon. These are questions that break time inquiries so profound that they ripple backward and forward, altering the perception of cause and consequence, of memory and anticipation, of what has happened and what is yet to occur. Consider a paradox like the grandfather paradox. If you could travel backward and alter a past event, what becomes of the future? Time in such a scenario ceases to be a fixed sequence. Each action, each observation, each inquiry becomes a potential agent of transformation, capable of reshaping events already set in the past and those yet to come. Questions that break time do not merely challenge understanding, they restructure the framework through which reality is interpreted. The past is no longer immutable, the future no longer predetermined, and the present becomes a shifting nexus of possibility. Philosophically, this is unsettling. Western thought often frames existence as linear, a march from origin to endpoint, from birth to death, from cause to effect. But questions that break time expose the limitations of this framework. In contemplating them, one confronts the universe as recursive rather than linear, cyclical rather than sequential. Each moment resonates across other moments. Each observation folds into past and future. Each choice generates consequences that cannot be contained within ordinary temporal understanding. Time becomes a fluid, dynamic landscape rather than a rigid path. At the quantum scale, time's malleability is echoed in experimental phenomena. Events do not always appear in a fixed order. Particles can exist in superpositions that blur distinctions between before and after. Measurement itself can influence outcomes in ways that challenge conventional temporal logic. The universe, at its most fundamental level, does not adhere strictly to human constructs of linearity. Questions that break time, therefore, are not merely theoretical. They emerge naturally from the structure of existence itself, reflecting the intricate, entangled, and paradoxical nature of reality. Human consciousness experiences these questions intimately. Memory, imagination, and anticipation are all temporal constructs, yet each is susceptible to the instability of perception. When confronted with questions about causality, predestination, or recursive feedback, the mind experiences temporal vertigo. Past experiences can be reinterpreted, futures imagined into present realities, and the present itself becomes a fluid interface between possibilities. The act of inquiry can stretch, contract, and fold time within consciousness, revealing that our sense of chronological order is provisional, adaptive, and ultimately a construct. These questions are also generative. By breaking time conceptually, they expand the horizon of what can be imagined, conceived, and understood. Creativity, insight, and innovation often arise precisely where conventional temporality is disrupted. Scientific breakthroughs, philosophical revelations, and artistic inspirations frequently emerge from a momentary suspension of linear thinking, a leap across sequences, a folding of cause and effect, an intuitive grasp of what exists beyond chronological constraints. In this sense, questions that break time are not destructive. They are generative, opening pathways to understanding that conventional sequences obscure. Yet they carry paradoxical tension. To grasp time as flexible is to confront the instability of experience itself. Decisions become simultaneously consequential and provisional. Memory becomes malleable, and reality itself seems negotiable. These questions illuminate a universe in which the ordinary rules of causation, sequence, and consequence are suspended. They challenge not only knowledge but perception, inviting a confrontation with the sublime, the infinite, and the inherently unknowable. Moreover, these questions reveal the intimate connection between observer and reality. Time is not merely a backdrop upon which events occur. It is interwoven with observation, cognition, and awareness. When the mind contemplates a question that breaks time, it participates in a subtle feedback loop. The inquiry alters the perception of time, and the altered perception in turn reshapes the inquiry. Consciousness becomes both observer and participant, generating a recursive dialogue with the unfolding of reality itself. Ultimately, questions that break time confront us with the impossibility of ultimate closure. No answer can fully resolve the paradoxes they present. No observation can definitively fix their consequences. And yet within this tension lies profound insight. To engage with these questions is to glimpse the fluidity of existence, the interdependence of past, present, and future, and the subtle architecture of reality in which linearity is but one of many possible perspectives. Time, once perceived as a constant river, is revealed as a multidimensional web, dynamic, responsive, and infinitely intricate. To dwell on questions that break time is to experience the impossible question in its purest form, a recognition that reality cannot be fully contained, that perception is inherently limited, and that every inquiry participates in an ongoing, recursive, and ever-expanding dialogue with existence itself. These questions do not merely challenge understanding, they redefine the very stage upon which understanding occurs, exposing the mind to the infinite loops, cycles, and paradoxes that underpin the cosmos. Imagine a mirror that does not reflect a single image, but countless versions of existence simultaneously. Every choice, every possibility, every potential outcome is captured within its depths. This is the mirror of all realities, a concept, a paradox, and an experiential frontier where the boundaries between self, world, and possibility blur into infinite reflection. To gaze into this mirror is to confront the full spectrum of existence, to witness not one reality, but the countless threads of what could be, what was, and what might yet emerge. The mind struggles here. Human cognition is accustomed to singular perception, one life, one present, one trajectory of events. But the mirror of all realities defies singularity. It reveals that every reality exists in potential, overlapping, and interacting in ways that are invisible to ordinary consciousness. The impossibility of comprehending this totality evokes vertigo, awe, and a subtle recognition. What we perceive as reality is merely a facet, a fragment, a reflection chosen from an endless array of possibilities. Philosophically, this idea resonates with multiverse theories. Each decision, each random fluctuation, each quantum event can generate a branching of worlds, creating parallel realities that exist simultaneously yet remain inaccessible. In this framework, the mirror does not merely reflect, it projects, expands, and folds. Every reflection is a node in a vast web, and every node contains within it the echoes of countless others. The universe is a hall of mirrors, and consciousness is both observer and participant, caught in the interplay of reflection and potential. The paradox deepens when applied to self-awareness. The mirror of all realities does not merely reflect the world, it reflects the mind itself in its infinite permutations. Every possible thought, every imagined identity, every variation of choice is represented. Here, the self is not singular but multiplicious, an amalgamation of all potential selves, existing simultaneously in parallel reflections. The mind that confronts this mirror experiences both unity and fragmentation, coherence and chaos, presence and multiplicity. Identity itself becomes a fluid construct, a convergence of infinite possibilities rather than a fixed entity. This mirror also challenges causality. If every potential exists simultaneously, then the linear flow of events is disrupted. Each reality in the mirror has its own trajectory, yet each is interconnected with others through subtle, often imperceptible threads. Cause and effect fold upon themselves, creating loops, feedbacks, and resonances across reflections. The observer becomes aware that reality is not a single narrative, but a symphony of overlapping, interacting possibilities, each contributing to the fabric of the whole. At the experiential level, the mirror of all realities evokes a profound psychological and existential tension. The mind longs for stability, certainty, and singularity, yet the mirror presents boundless multiplicity. Every perception becomes provisional, every belief tentative, every experience contextual, yet within this tension lies a source of insight and liberation. By engaging with the mirror, consciousness learns to navigate complexity, to hold ambiguity without collapse, and to recognize that reality itself is richer, deeper, and more intricate than linear perception allows. The mirror is not static, it is responsive, dynamic, and participatory. Observation itself alters the reflection. Awareness generates shifts, attention modulates perspective, and focus collapses certain possibilities into perceptible experience. In essence, the act of perceiving in the mirror of all realities is itself an act of creation. Reality is not merely reflected, it is co-authored, and consciousness becomes both witness and shaper, navigating a continuum that is simultaneously infinite and intimately personal. Art, literature, and philosophy have long engaged with this concept metaphorically. Stories of parallel worlds, alternate lives, and infinite outcomes reflect the human intuition that reality is not singular. Dreams, imagination, and creativity reveal glimpses of multiplicity, showing that even within finite perception, the mind can intuit the unbounded web of possibility. The mirror of all realities is both a philosophical and existential tool, offering a lens through which the impossible question of existence becomes perceptible in its vast recursive depth. Ultimately, to confront the mirror of all realities is to confront the essence of the impossible question itself. It is to recognize that every thought, every choice, every act of observation participates in a boundless continuum, a labyrinth of potential that defies finality. The mirror reflects not only the universe but the limitations, aspirations, and infinite potential of consciousness. In this reflection, the mind senses both fragility and expansiveness, finitude and infinitude, coherence and boundless multiplicity. The mirror of all realities does not yield answers. It reveals relationships, possibilities, and the subtle architecture of existence. It invites humility and awe, the recognition that perception is always partial, and the acknowledgement that the universe is not a fixed image, but a dynamic interplay of infinite reflections. Here, at this threshold, consciousness confronts both the impossible question and its own boundless capacity to imagine, participate, and witness the unfolding of all realities simultaneously. There comes a point in the exploration of the impossible question where the structures of reality themselves begin to dissolve, when everything becomes nothing, all certainty, all form, all distinction vanishes into a vast ungraspable void. This is not merely the absence of objects or thought, it is the collapse of the very framework that defines existence. Space becomes undefined, time loses sequence, matter and consciousness blur, and the mind faces the terrifying, awe-inspiring expanse of pure potential, without definition. The sensation of this nothingness is paradoxical. It is both emptiness and fullness, a void that contains every possibility precisely because it imposes no limits. In ordinary perception, nothing is an absence, a negation, yet in this context, nothing is an active state, a primordial canvas upon which universes can emerge and dissolve, over and over again. It is a silence so profound that it hums with latent possibility, a stillness so complete that it contains the rhythm of creation itself. Philosophers and mystics have long recognized this threshold. In Eastern traditions, the concept of shunyata, emptiness, does not signify annihilation, but the boundless potentiality underlying all phenomena. In this void, distinctions of self and other, cause and effect, existence and non-existence lose absolute meaning. To experience when everything becomes nothing is to perceive reality stripped to its essence, beyond categories, beyond labels, beyond form. It is the pure substrate upon which existence continuously unfolds. At the level of physics, this paradox finds resonance in the vacuum of space and the foundations of quantum reality. Empty space is not truly empty. It seethes with virtual particles, fluctuating energy and probabilistic potential. The nothing of the universe is fertile, dynamic and generative. What appears absent is in fact pregnant with possibility. In this sense, nothing is not negation. It is a creative force, a wellspring from which everything arises and into which everything can return. The mind experiences this nothingness as both liberation and vertigo. Conceptual frameworks, categories, and assumptions collapse, leaving awareness suspended without support. The familiar markers of identity, narrative, and causality fade. Yet in this collapse lies profound insight. Reality is not fixed, not bounded, and not limited by the categories the mind imposes upon it. In confronting the void, consciousness glimpses the infinite potentiality underlying all existence. The paradox deepens further. If everything can become nothing, then nothing is inseparable from everything. The universe is a continuous dance between presence and absence, manifestation and dissolution, being and non-being. Every form that arises is temporary, every certainty provisional, and every act of perception a delicate interplay between presence and absence. The impossible question thrives here, for it cannot be answered through conventional logic or observation. It can only be intuited, experienced, and reflected upon. Psychologically, this threshold illuminates the fragility of perception and the elasticity of consciousness. When familiar anchors vanish, the mind is forced into a state of pure awareness, a space where observation itself becomes a creative act. Here, nothing is not an obstacle but a medium. The absence of form allows the emergence of novel thought, insight, and imagination. It is in the void that consciousness confronts its own capacity for creation, recognition, and reflection, unbound by the constraints of ordinary reality. Existentially, the recognition that everything can become nothing challenges the mind's attachment to permanence and certainty. Life, identity, and experience are revealed as transient and mutable, yet this is not merely nihilistic. It is liberating. The impermanence of form opens space for creativity, possibility, and engagement. Awareness of nothingness deepens appreciation of existence, for every form emerges from and returns to this void, and every moment is a fleeting manifestation of the infinite potential from which it arose. Ultimately, when everything becomes nothing, the impossible question reaches its purest form: what is existence and what is its foundation? The mind confronts the interplay of presence and absence, the subtle balance between creation and dissolution, and the paradox that nothingness itself is pregnant with everything. To dwell here is to witness the universe as a process rather than an object, as a rhythm rather than a sequence, as a dance of infinite potential rather than a fixed reality. In this threshold of nothingness, consciousness recognizes both its fragility and its power. The mind is finite, yet it can perceive the infinite. Reality appears transient, yet it is continuous. Everything in the end is simultaneously present and absent, created and dissolved, meaningful and unknowable. The void is not emptiness. It is the foundation upon which the impossible question thrives, the stage upon which consciousness encounters the sublime, and the silence from which all existence speaks. Some questions do not arrive to be answered. They arrive to resonate, to persist, to reverberate endlessly across the corridors of consciousness. The question that echoes forever is one such inquiry. It has no final solution, no endpoint, no closure. It exists not as a problem to be solved, but as a phenomenon to be experienced, a pulse that travels through thought, perception, and reality, leaving traces of wonder, unease, and infinite reflection in its wake. To encounter such a question is to confront an endless loop. Every attempt to answer it generates new questions. Every reflection opens further corridors of uncertainty. It is a feedback loop of consciousness, in which inquiry begets awareness, awareness begets insight, and insight begets deeper inquiry. The echoing question is both subject and catalyst. It participates in the creation of thought, even as it defies definition, shaping minds even as it resists containment. Time itself bends under the weight of this phenomenon. The question is eternal, indifferent to chronology, repeating itself across moments, lifetimes, and epochs. Philosophers, scientists, and mystics alike have glimpsed its resonance. Inquiries into existence, consciousness, and reality recur across generations, their echoes layered upon one another, each iteration subtly reshaping the understanding of the last. In this sense, the question is not merely temporal, it is omnitemporal, weaving together past, present, and future into a singular, unending resonance. The paradox embedded in an echoing question is profound. To engage with it is to participate in a recursive cycle of thought. The more one attempts to resolve it, the more expansive it becomes. This is the essence of the impossible question. It does not yield to linear reasoning or conventional logic. Every answer is provisional, every insight partial, and every perspective limited. And yet, the very impossibility of resolution is what gives the question its power, its depth, and its capacity to shape consciousness. At the level of human cognition, the question that echoes forever reveals both limitation and capacity. The mind cannot fully encompass infinity, yet it can navigate the reverberations of the infinite through reflection, imagination, and awareness. Memory, perception, and anticipation fold into the echo, creating recursive loops in which understanding itself becomes both subject and object. The mind, like the question, becomes a mirror of endless resonance. Every reflection carries traces of previous echoes. Every thought is a wave in the ongoing vibration of inquiry. In a broader metaphysical sense, the echoing question illustrates the participatory nature of reality. Consciousness does not merely observe the universe, it interacts with it. The questions we ask, the inquiries we pursue, and the reflections we entertain leave subtle imprints on perception and reality itself. The echoing question is not external, it is co-created by mind and world, a dynamic interplay between observer, observed, and the infinite web of possibilities that binds them. Even the smallest encounter with such a question transforms experience. A fleeting thought about existence, an intuition about consciousness, or a moment of philosophical curiosity can set the echoing loop into motion, resonating far beyond the initial spark. Like a pebble dropped into a vast lake, the question generates ripples that expand outward, intersecting with countless other reflections, forming a network of infinite resonance. Its impact is not measured in closure, but in the depth, intensity, and expansiveness of awareness it engenders. The question that echoes forever also confronts the mind with the limits of certainty. In the attempt to resolve it, the mind encounters its own boundaries, its own assumptions, and the contingency of knowledge itself. Each echo reveals both what is known and what remains unknowable. The impossibility of final answers is not a failure. It is the recognition that understanding is inherently provisional, that awareness is always incomplete, and that consciousness thrives in the tension between knowing and not knowing. Ultimately, the question that echoes forever embodies the essence of the impossible question. It is infinite, recursive, and generative. It transforms thought into experience, observation into creation, and inquiry into participation. To engage with it is not to find closure, but to dwell in the space of reflection, to navigate the resonance of infinite possibilities, and to participate in a dialogue that spans consciousness itself. The echoing question teaches that existence is not a fixed answer, but a continuous unfolding. That reality is a dynamic conversation, and that awareness is both participant and witness. In its perpetual resonance, the mind glimpses the vast, intricate, and paradoxical nature of the universe, realizing that some questions are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be lived, experienced, and heard reverberating through the corridors of time, space, and thought. There comes a threshold where understanding falters, where the scaffolding of significance crumbles, and where what once seemed coherent begins to dissolve. This is the collapse of meaning, a moment when concepts, narratives, and values lose their grip, leaving consciousness suspended in a void of ambiguity. It is not mere confusion or uncertainty, it is a deeper unraveling, a confrontation with the fragility of interpretation itself, where the labels and frameworks humans rely upon no longer suffice. Meaning, in ordinary experience, acts as a stabilizer. It organizes perception, guides action, and structures thought. It tells us what matters, what is true, and what is real. But at the frontier of impossible inquiry, meaning is exposed as provisional, contingent, and ultimately constructed. Every symbol, every word, every concept is revealed as a temporary scaffold, erected by consciousness, to navigate the vast and indifferent complexity of reality. When these scaffolds collapse, the mind faces both terror and liberation. Terror in the absence of certainty, liberation in the recognition of boundless potential. Philosophically, the collapse of meaning resonates with existentialist thought. Thinkers like Nietzsche and Camus grappled with the notion that life might have no inherent purpose, that truth might be provisional, and that values are human constructs. Yet within this recognition lies paradoxical possibility. The absence of imposed meaning does not imply emptiness, but opens the space for the creation of authentic significance. When meaning collapses, consciousness is invited to participate in the ongoing construction of interpretation, to engage with reality in ways unbound by inherited narratives or predefined answers. At the psychological level, the collapse of meaning can be disorienting. Human cognition craves coherence, seeking patterns, causality, and explanation. When these fail, the mind experiences vertigo, existential anxiety, or profound awe. Yet the very act of facing the collapse is transformative. It exposes the creative potential of consciousness, the capacity to inhabit ambiguity, to navigate paradox, and to discover new forms of understanding. Meaning is not eliminated. It is reframed, dynamic and participatory, emerging from engagement rather than imposition. Even in physics and cosmology, echoes of this collapse appear. The universe, when viewed at the extremes of scale or through the lens of quantum uncertainty, defies simple interpretation. At subatomic levels, particles exist in superpositions, interacting probabilistically rather than deterministically. At cosmic scales, the vastness and complexity of space challenge the imposition of coherent narratives. Reality itself resists fixed meaning. Patterns emerge only through observation, interpretation, and the interplay of consciousness with the universe. This collapse also intersects with the impossible question at a fundamental level. When meaning dissolves, the distinction between question and answer, cause and effect, observer and observed becomes fluid. The structures used to anchor understanding, the assumptions, definitions, and frameworks, no longer provide firm footing. Consciousness is confronted with the raw, unmediated substrate of reality, a space in which significance is generated, not inherited, and in which awareness must navigate without preordained guideposts. Yet the collapse is not merely destructive, it is generative. By revealing the contingency of meaning, it empowers consciousness to create anew, to engage with possibility, and to shape perception and interpretation with unprecedented freedom. In the absence of fixed structures, imagination, reflection, and insight expand. Every moment becomes an opportunity to craft significance, to explore the subtle architecture of understanding, and to participate actively in the unfolding of reality itself. Ultimately, the collapse of meaning illustrates the paradox at the heart of the impossible question. Reality is both structured and indeterminate, perception is both guided and provisional, and consciousness is both bounded and boundless. When meaning collapses, the mind encounters the infinite landscape of interpretation, the dynamic interplay of presence and absence, and the fragile yet fertile space in which awareness can operate creatively. To dwell at this threshold is to recognize that certainty is provisional, that narratives are constructed, and that significance is emergent rather than inherent. It is an encounter with both fragility and possibility, with absence and creation, with the limits of comprehension, and the boundless capacity of consciousness to navigate them. The collapse of meaning is not an end, it is a doorway into the infinite complexity of existence, an invitation to engage with reality as a living, dynamic, and participatory phenomenon. In this space, the impossible question is both sharpened and illuminated. The absence of fixed meaning does not dissolve inquiry, it intensifies it. Every reflection becomes an act of creation, every observation a negotiation with the indeterminate, and every thought a resonance within the endless echo of possibilities. To confront the collapse of meaning is to confront the essence of existence, a universe that is simultaneously intelligible and unknowable, finite and infinite, structured and fluid, demanding both humility and curiosity from consciousness itself. At the culmination of inquiry, there comes a confrontation that no mind fully anticipates, facing the impossible truth. This truth is not a single fact, a revelation, or a resolution. It is the recognition that reality, consciousness, and existence resist ultimate containment. The impossible truth is the acknowledgement that the questions that have haunted thought, challenged understanding, and unraveled certainty do not resolve neatly. They persist, echo, and expand, revealing the paradoxical architecture of the universe itself. This truth confronts the mind with its own limitations. Human cognition is a finite instrument attempting to comprehend a boundless, recursive, and infinitely complex cosmos. Every model, theory, or framework is provisional. Every insight is partial. The impossible truth is not about failure or inadequacy. It is about recognition that understanding is always a process, never a destination. It is a horizon that recedes as we approach it, an infinite landscape reflected in finite consciousness. Philosophically, this recognition has profound implications. The impossible truth exposes the fragility of certainty, the contingency of knowledge, and the constructed nature of meaning. Yet it is not despairing, it is liberating. By confronting the limits of comprehension, consciousness opens itself to possibility, creativity, and engagement with the unknown. The impossible truth is not a final answer, but a threshold, a space in which inquiry, reflection, and imagination coexist with awareness of the infinite. At the existential level, facing the impossible truth is disorienting. It challenges deeply held assumptions about identity, reality, and causality. The self, once perceived as discrete and stable, appears as a node within a vast interwoven web of observation, potentiality, and recursive interaction. Time, once linear, is fluid, meaning once fixed is provisional, cause and effect, once clear blur into a multidimensional lattice. Consciousness experiences both vertigo and expansion, the tension of being finite while engaging with the infinite. Yet paradoxically, this confrontation is generative. The impossible truth does not paralyze, it expands perception. By acknowledging the limitations of understanding, the mind becomes capable of perceiving the subtle interplay between reality and consciousness, potential and actuality, observation and creation. The impossible truth is a catalyst, revealing that existence is not merely a series of outcomes, but a dynamic, participatory process in which awareness itself shapes and is shaped by the unfolding cosmos. At a deeper level, facing the impossible truth is a moment of intimacy with existence. It is the recognition that the universe is not separate from the observer, that observation, thought, and reflection participate in the ongoing emergence of reality. The impossible truth is not external. It is embedded within the fabric of consciousness, a mirror in which the mind glimpses both its own limitations and its capacity for insight. Awareness and reality are entwined, reflecting, amplifying, and co-creating each other in ways that defy linear logic and conventional understanding. The impossible truth also highlights the paradox of knowledge. To know the limits of understanding is itself a form of understanding. Consciousness recognizes that every conclusion is provisional, every perception interpretive, and every structure of meaning temporary. Yet this awareness does not diminish engagement. It enhances it, transforming curiosity into reverence, observation into participation, and inquiry into an exploration of the boundless possibilities that lie beyond conventional comprehension. Ultimately, facing the impossible truth is the final confrontation with the impossible question. It is the realization that some questions have no ultimate answer, that reality is inherently paradoxical, and that consciousness is both finite and capable of infinite reflection. Yet within this confrontation lies a subtle and profound empowerment, the recognition that participation, observation, and awareness are themselves acts of engagement with the infinite. The impossible truth does not end inquiry. It illuminates its purpose, revealing the interplay between understanding and mystery, presence and absence, being and potential. To dwell here is to accept paradox as the structure of reality, to embrace uncertainty as the rhythm of consciousness, and to recognize that existence is neither fully knowable nor fully unknowable. The impossible truth is both a limit and a liberation, a boundary that simultaneously expands perception. It is the space in which the impossible question lives fully, where consciousness meets the sublime, and where awareness realizes that engagement with reality is an ongoing, infinite, and recursive act. In the end, facing the impossible truth is less about finding closure, and more about inhabiting the tension of existence. It is a recognition that reality cannot be entirely contained, that knowledge is inherently partial, and that the mind itself is a participant in the unfolding mystery. The impossible question remains, persistent and boundless, but the mind stands transformed, aware of its limitations, conscious of its capacity, and attuned to the vast, recursive, and endlessly resonant nature of the universe it inhabits. After traversing 20 sections of inquiry, reflection, and paradox, we arrive at a threshold where understanding itself pauses. The impossible question, the one that fractures certainty, stretches perception, and dissolves conventional boundaries, remains unresolved. Yet this is precisely its power, not in delivering answers, but in compelling the mind to confront its own limits, to navigate uncertainty, and to experience the vast, recursive, and unbounded fabric of reality. The journey through these questions reveals that the universe is not a closed book, but an infinite hall of mirrors, a dynamic interplay of consciousness, potential, and observation. Each section, from the question that cannot be answered, to facing the impossible truth, has peeled back layers of perception, exposing the paradoxical architecture underlying existence. Time is neither fixed nor linear. Consciousness is both finite and infinite. Meaning is contingent, and reality is simultaneously structured and fluid. The impossible question is a constant thread that weaves these insights together, a resonance that cannot be fully captured but can be deeply experienced. It exists not as a puzzle to solve, but as a lens through which the mind can explore the sublime complexity of existence itself. This journey also illuminates the relationship between the observer and the observed. Reality is not merely external. It interacts with awareness, thought, and reflection. Observation collapses possibilities. Consciousness participates in creation, and perception shapes the very universe it contemplates. In confronting the impossible question, the mind becomes a participant, a mirror reflecting infinite possibilities, and a nexus through which existence reveals both its mystery and its potential. The paradox is encountered, the infinite loop of inquiry, the collapse of meaning, the mirror of all realities, are not barriers but invitations. They invite engagement, reflection, and the recognition that the act of questioning is itself a form of creation. Yet perhaps the most profound insight is the recognition of limits. The mind is finite, reality is complex, and answers are provisional. Infinity cannot be fully grasped, time cannot be fully contained, and meaning cannot be entirely fixed. And yet, within these limits lies liberation. Consciousness becomes capable of inhabiting uncertainty without fear, exploring paradox without collapse, and embracing the profound creativity inherent in the unanswerable. The impossible question, by resisting closure, opens space for awareness to expand, for imagination to flourish, and for perception to deepen. In the end, the impossible question is both a challenge and an invitation. A challenge to confront uncertainty, ambiguity, and paradox, and an invitation to engage fully with the unfolding mystery of existence. Its power lies not in resolution, but in resonance, an echoing presence that shapes thought, consciousness, and perception. To live with this question is to live awake within a universe that is endlessly complex, profoundly interconnected, and infinitely mysterious. The mind may never solve it, yet in facing it, consciousness encounters the sublime, the boundless, and the truly impossible, the infinite potential of existence itself.